So, do any of you remember how crispy, shiny, and vivid colors became back in the mid-90s? With a new coloring style that had all the flair and splashiness that had never been seen before. A coloring style that would become a staple in comic books for decades. And a coloring style that was made popular by a small group of talented people, which opened up the door to a whole new generation of talent. This is the story behind the rise and fall of the two leading color studios that rocked the 90s and 2000s, Liquid and Digital Chameleon, the trailblazers behind modern comic book coloring. Now, before I begin, let's take a moment to remember those wonderful colorists who never received the proper credit they deserve, but whose work was essential in the success of the medium. Figures like Jack Adler and Stan Goldberg, to name a few. However, this is even sadder when you take into account that a large portion of the artists behind these iconic and timeless colors were actually women. Figures like Marie Severine, Adrienne Roy, Tatiana Wood, Petra Goldberg, and Glynis Oliver, who deserve so much more praise and recognition than they ever received. But regardless, so after several decades of comics with beautiful flat but simpler colors and very little in the way of shading, a new technique began forming during the late 80s, which was entirely digital and with a much bigger, much wider arsenal of tools than ever before, which allowed colorists to achieve a quality level that they could never have imagined. And so 90s comics began using this brand new coloring technique, which at the time fans welcomed with open arms. However, there are two coloring studios that were formed and who pretty much became the go-to guys when it came to colors. Digital Chameleon, which was founded in 1991, and Liquid, which was founded in 1996. On one hand, Digital Chameleon, led by George Freeman, Laverne Kinsersky, and Christopher Chukri, was the Canadian coloring studio that placed this coloring style on the map. On the other hand, Liquid, led by Christian Lichtner and Aaron Lucen, was the coloring studio that helped popularize this style. So between these two studios, digital coloring reached heights never before seen in comics. And for several years, Digital Chameleon had a strong and steady relationship with DC, getting to color a wide range of titles, doing the colors of DC's bigger and smaller properties, such as Batman and several other Batman-related titles, Aquaman, Spectre, Scooby-Doo, Superman, Action Comics, and several other Superman-related titles, Teen Titans, Young Justice, as well as several Vertigo titles as well, and the list goes on. While Liquid took charge of the colors of countless Marvel titles, all the way from Spider-Man, Thor, Iron Man, Wolverine, Cable, and Elektra, with Fantastic Four, X-Men, and Extreme X-Men being their most famous, as well as their longest running gig. Liquid also got to work with other companies, like Image, Top Cow, and Cliffhanger. Now, it really needs to be said that during their time on Marvel, Liquid actually brought out the very best from a lot of artists, but especially in the case of Joe Mad, whose work looked absolutely spectacular and quite frankly never better, becoming a perfect match. Sadly, just as it happens with everything else, times change, and so do tastes, and the love for these type of colors dwindled little by little, which resulted in the end of these two iconic coloring studios. Digital Chameleon closed its doors and stopped operating as a joint studio in 2003, while Christian from Liquid moved on from comics to video games, getting to work on games such as The Third Diablo and Darksiders. However, Digital Chameleon and Liquid's legacy would live on, as their iconic and flashy style started a new boom of digital coloring, which brought a whole new generation of artists who adopted this new vibrant style. Figures like Chris Sotomayor, Andy Troy, Tanya and Richard Horry, and Pamela Rambo are just some of the fresh faces that help make this coloring style far more available and present than ever before. Other coloring studios also emerged, such as Heroic Age, Wildstorm FX, and Studio F, all which took the torch and carried on with their legacy. Now, this might sound exaggerated, but please hear me out before you slap me, please. This wave of splashy coloring helped skyrocket several artists' career in a way that perhaps, just perhaps, they otherwise wouldn't have. And not because they're not good enough or anything like that, but because these colors brought out the very best out of their line art. Again, perhaps, just perhaps. Such is the case of Amanda Connor, who is an amazingly talented, lovely gal, but who, let's face it, has used this type of coloring many times on her best work. Just take a look at what these gorgeous colors can do for Amanda's lines. They just bring out something special in her art style. And as you can see that even though simpler colors do look nice, nothing makes her work stand out quite like these vibrant colors. So call me crazy all you want, but I feel like a good chunk of her major mainstream success comes from these gorgeous colors. And while I agree that this coloring style does not seem to fit every single artist or art style, it's a bit hard to deny that it does wonders for the right ones. However, something happened during the 2000s that these type of colors began to fade, making way for flatter or simpler ones to make a comeback, until this coloring style was no longer used. And it happened so gradually that I don't think we ever noticed. Now, I do appreciate the flat cel shading approach that many titles use to this day, as it sometimes highlights the line art much better, but I still sort of wish we could get at least a few titles with colors in this classic liquid style. Now, I know that not a lot of people seem to like this type of coloring, and that's fine. But there's so much hate against it online, and people are so vocal against it, even from professional colorists working today. And so I wonder where all this hate comes from. And I do have a theory, but it's only a theory, so perhaps, just perhaps, this type of coloring reminds people of the excesses of the 90s and all that came with them, which admittedly was a lot to handle for some, but that's another subject for another video. Despite the hate, and for some reason, call it nostalgia or what you will, this coloring style works for me. Yes, I know it might be a little distracting, and my boyfriend calls it rubber, he says that everything looks like rubber. And there might be some truth to that, but this type of coloring also gives everyone and everything a spotlight. It makes everyone look like a real character, not just a background prop. All the way from the main characters to the supporting ones and even the backgrounds, everyone looks great and radiant, beautiful and alive. And quite frankly, if I ever get to work in comics, this is the type of coloring I'd like to get. And even if you don't like them, you kinda have to give them props. Because in comics, colorists rarely achieve the fame, success, and popularity that they deserve. But somehow Digital Chameleon and Liquid's innovative approach to comic coloring actually made fans appreciate the craft, at least for a little while, and gave back the spotlight to this overlooked art form. But regardless, what about you, dear viewer? What do you think about this coloring style? And what would you say if it made a comeback? Feel free to speak your mind, although please be respectful. And as always, thank you very much for watching, hope to see you in the next one, be safe and well. And remember, that color has the power to influence the soul, because colors are the styles of nature.